year, African countries loses an estimated $88.6 billion as illicit capital flight, according to the 2020 edition of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. They released a report yesterday, which Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Osinbajo, was also part of that. And the report, Economic Development in Africa, entitled Tackling Illicit Financial Flows for Sustainable Development. And today we are unpacking the issue of illicit financial flows in Africa with Mr. Suraj, the Executive Director of Human and Development Agenda. He's also the chairman of the Coalition of Civil Societies Network Against Corruption. It's a pleasure having you on SaharaTV, Mr. Suraj.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure here.
Before we move into the impact that illicit financial flows have on the African continent, and in Nigeria particularly, could you help us understand what exactly we're talking about when we use the term illicit financial flows, sir?
When we talk about illicit financial flow, this is actually where we unpack a very complex situation in terms of movement of finances and also assets, which are usually hidden from the eyes of the law in certain instances, and also in some other instances, using some of the inadequacies of the law, and sometimes also using the conspiracy of some of the law officers who are usually expected to be either law enforcement agencies or regulatory agencies. And that is many times, it could be internal in terms of within a country. It could be regional, which would be within a certain region or sub-region. When you look at the global framework, then you will be looking at Africa as a region, and then you would have some of the other sub-regions like the West Africa. So it could be sub-region within West Africa, it could be regional within Africa, and then it could be global, where it becomes international, and then it goes from region to other regions or between countries in different regions. So illicit financial flow has been also official in terms of public officials, and then so it's been private, where you have private companies, private individuals responsible for that. So it could be perpetrated by public officials with some conspiracy and collaboration with some of the internal private organizations like the banks, sometimes the estate managers and property identifiers and managers. It could be lawyers, and then some of the designated non-financial institutions. Especially then you will have the financial institutions playing some very critical roles, local financial institutions, and then international financial institutions playing these very nefarious roles of assisting politically exposed persons, private persons, in moving some national resources, funds, assets out of the reach of the nation.
Now, let me get your opinion on this. I mean, you mentioned some of the sectors that could be affected, where you talk about the financial sectors. It's also been noted that the extractive sectors and the Nigeria's oil and gas industry has also been more vulnerable as far as these issues are concerned. But the question is, how will you assess, how has Nigeria been affected by these illicit financial flows from them?
And Nigeria has been, I think, more grievously impacted than many of the other African countries. And this you can tell with the number of cases that you have across the world affecting private and political persons. You would have seen a situation where Companies are involved and accused in dealing with this. You've seen former presidents, who are now having some of the stolen assets being repatriated back into the country. You've had situations where many of the companies and corporate entities being involved in some of the cases of illicit financial flow from Nigeria. So very sadly to say, Nigeria has actually witnessed almost all facets of illicit financial flow. You've had quite a number, even within the sub-region. Nigerians will rate as one of nationals with highest number of assets in Dubai, for instance, if you go there. And these are not only owned by public officers who disguise some of their assets and funds into those jurisdictions. It is also about quite a number of them having companies in some tax-free even companies, shell companies, where you are allowed to hide your the identity. So sometimes this is not just about the direct flow of these funds, it's also the evasion of the constitutional or legal tax and duties and VAT that these companies, persons are meant to pay, that they evade this, which are some of the natural resources that should have been counting for the country in terms of the population and the profits that are made. So the private companies and corporates, international ones, are evading the taxes in the country by even operating some shell companies outside the country and claiming to be paying dividends to these companies when there are really no dividends paid, but just an opportunity to conduct some illicit activities and fund flow out of the country. There are quite a number of Nigerian officials who have gone to invest in neighboring countries in West Africa without paying the necessary taxes on those monies that are moved out of the country. Banks have facilitated the purchase of assets for public persons, the politically exposed persons outside the country without actually going through the normal financial process, documentation, and also record for appropriate taxes within the system. And many of these are illicit funds, illicit and toxic assets that normally shouldn't have been allowed to go out of the country under the condition through which they went out. And the unfortunate aspect is also the failure of some of the countries of destination to put in place appropriate sanctions to prevent the flow of illicit assets into their jurisdiction.
Now, if you are able to see just how much illicit financial flows cost African societies and the economies, and we're able to also identify some of the sectors that are vulnerable, why has it been so difficult for African leaders to stop these illicit financial flows out of the continent?
No, it's usually difficult because, like I just told you, it takes two to tango. It is not just about the African countries alone. It is usually about the influence of some of the superpowers who are also beneficiaries of these illicit funds. So many of the countries of destination relies on these illicit funds to even support their economy locally. So many times they not only shield the perpetrators of these illegal activities, they provide some enabling environment for them to not even hold and hide the properties, but even to get political asylum when they are discovered in their local country. So many of them already secured enough funding and amass enough wealth to buy golden visa or some measure of security, diplomatic, in the countries of destination. That is number one. Number two, quite a number of the current leaders of Africa are still some of the beneficiaries and perpetrators of the act. So it is not easy for them to actually stop the bleeding because they are also drawing some of the benefit of the bleeding in Africa. So it is still increasingly becoming difficult to get a unanimity, even at the level of the African multilateral agencies, because quite a number of them, it's about number, and it's also about political influence. So where you still have a sizable number of corrupt leaders administering the affairs of countries in Africa, it's still becoming very difficult to get some measure of political commitment that is in stopping the illicit financial flow. And it's also about resources, is about security. So many times you see African countries that are on the verge of stopping the trend at the local level. And there's the high pressure from international organizations who are many times also part of the conspiracy, working with some of the government in those countries, and at the same time some individuals of high influence, to introduce some extraneous, difficult condition for such countries to not only exist, but also to know some measure of peace. And you will find situation of insecurity and diversion that will distract many of those African countries from going ahead with it. So when you look at illicit financial flow as part of the corruption, it is not just an act, it is also almost sometimes a design by the powerful lords within the country and even outside the country.
The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, while giving a speech at the UNCTAD conference yesterday, highlighted some of what Nigeria has actually done to combat illicit financial flows. Part of what he outlined includes addressing loopholes in legal and regulatory frameworks that makes it easy to undercut national efforts. He also talked about the fact that Nigeria has strengthened investigative ability to track, stop, and secure the return of stolen assets. Let me ask you, how has Nigeria actually fared in this regard?
Well, I think Nigeria, as the Vice President, possibly, obviously, I can say, has overrated the achievement of the country. I mean, there's no doubt in the fact that the country has made some significant improvement in terms of dealing with some of the issues of corruption and asset tracing. But the country has not attained any significant status in terms of tracing and identifying, illicit assets. I mean, there are still quite a number of illicit assets going out of the country by some serving government officials and the former government officials. So, like I said, it's still an overestimation of what's been achieved by the country. Yes, there's some effort in that is expected to prevent the corruption in the system and also illicit flow of funds, including the BVN, the Treasury Single Account, also the independence of the Financial Intelligence Unit. But there's still a lot to do. I mean, property identification issues that needs to be linked with individual is still there. So when people are still able to convert liquid cash into asset without being noticed or without sanction, I mean, you can say you have started the process of identification. And unfortunately for the country, which was getting a very significant result from its whistleblower policy, that policy has been jettisoned, has been frustrated, it's been corrupted and compromised. So people are not even coming forward with information on many of illicit assets and proceeds of crime that would have assisted the government in attaining some of those issues.
Let me also get your view on this. He also stated that they put in place policies to guide the management of recovered proceeds from illicit financial flows. Doesn't that contradict some of what we've seen, where looted, recovered assets are also being relooted again by these same government officials?
Well, unfortunately, I have not seen evidence of any relooting of looted funds. What you found playing out recently was one of the worst form of, internal infighting between within a particular government, and that is where you've seen the allegation, unsubstantiated, undefended allegation by the Attorney General accusing the EFCC and the leadership of the EFCC, represented by Magu, of looting or under-declaring or diverting some of the recovered assets. And all evidence from the Auditor General of the Federation, from the Central Bank of Nigeria, and from other sources of investigation has proven all those allegations to be completely untrue, unsubstantiated. And when the Attorney General was invited by the panel set up by the government to investigate the matter, to appear before it and substantiate those allegations, he claimed that those were just petitions he received from different people. They were not investigated before, they were also pushed into the media before he said. So there were really no any evidence of relooting of the looted assets under this current government. But in terms of the management of proceeds of crime and recovered assets, so far some of those that have been returned from outside the country, which were used for the social intervention program, we can say significantly that has impacted, in the society, and the evaluation of the final process is what can then tell if they've been 100%, there's been 100% compliance with the stated, purpose of utilization, or there's been diversion from that stated agreement. But the ones that are recovered locally, I think the CBN has a record of some of the financial recovery that went directly into the Central Bank of Nigeria, and it is near impossible for individuals to even tamper with such recovered assets.
Now, finally, beyond coordinated actions by a range of stakeholders, as well as strengthening regulatory framework, we understand civil societies like your organization and others, whistleblowers as well as investigative journalists, have played a significant critical role in revealing the magnitude of illicit financial flows. What should be done beyond these transparency initiatives by these organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it's important that it is not just for recovery, because if we're limited to recovery, which is why I deliberately and consciously stated that, the vice president is actually overrating the achievement, is that there's the need to prevent these corrupt practices and flow from happening. We can't be spending the cost of tracing some of the assets, the cost of recovery of some of the assets are just too enormous for the country to be wasting such a huge amount of investigating cases and also reporting it. So what is very critical and crucial for everybody is that we must actually prevent corruption from happening and then save the country the resources that have been distributed for that purpose. I thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Larry, for helping us unpack the issues of the illicit financial flows out of Africa and Nigeria.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it a lot, sir.